There's no doubt that having fierce competition helps the players to learn from each other, which is why sports rivalries are seen as a necessity not just for the sake of the sport, but for the players' growth as well. In this video, we'll take a look at why Novak Djokovic is seen as a major player to help boost Carlos Alcaraz and his career. Let's dive right in, starting off with Novak Djokovic's involvement in Carlos Alcaraz's development. Carlos will soon enter the 2023 tennis season as the world #1 tennis player. He's had a fantastic year by winning his first Grand Slam title and becoming the world's youngest player that's been ranked #1. With all of these successes under his belt, it's clear that the 19-year-old clearly had to work hard to get there. Novak Djokovic, on the other hand, had a tough year. Even though he won Wimbledon, he still had to miss this year's US Open and Australian Open because of his refusal to get vaccinated for COVID-19. But this year, the Australian government has lifted the visa ban on the Serbian player, and we'll get to see him at his favorite Grand Slam. And it seems that Carlos Alcaraz's coach, Juan Carlos Ferrero, is celebrating his return more than others. While talking to Eurosport, Ferrero mentioned how important Novak's presence was for Carlos. He claimed that Carlos needed him in that tournament as it was important for him to compete against the best players in the world. He claimed while Rafael Nadal was there in the previous Australian Open, they also needed Djokovic at the tournament. Ferrero referred to the ATP Masters 1000 event in Madrid. Alcaraz ended up defeating the Serb in 3 sets. Ferrero claimed that in that match, it was obvious how Carlos increased his levels to match up to the 21-time Grand Slam winner. He added that he even discussed this with Carlos, who agreed that in order to win the Australian Open, he needed to win against the best of the best. Moving on to more advice to young Carlos given to him by his coach. As the year wraps up, Coach Ferrero has plenty of advice and feedback to give the 19-year-old. He began coaching him back in 2018 after he stopped coaching the German tennis player Alexander Zverev, and since then, he's formed a strong bond with Carlos. In the same interview with Eurosport, Juan revealed that his bond with Carlos differs from what he and Zverev shared. He explained that he saw Carlos as his son and as a second player. He claimed that in their partnership also, he had a lot to learn from Carlos, and together they grow as well as they learn from each other. He added that the 19-year-old was a very nice guy and that he loved coaching him. But as much as he praised the 19-year-old, he also shared his high hopes for him. He stated how he tells Carlos regularly how he needs to be consistent with his wins. That means winning a Grand Slam title next year is a necessity for Ferrero. What's more, he also threw a lot of shade at his previous protege Alexander. He shared that coaching Carlos was more refreshing because of what he suffered while coaching Zverev. The German tennis player didn't know much about being a professional. He added that it was easier with Carlos because they shared the same culture and vision about where they wanted to take this partnership. Well, we don't know what happened between Zverev and Juan, but it sure wasn't pretty. Following up with Stefanos Tsitsipas eyeing the #1 spot next year. 3 players have had their time at the #1 spot in 2022. Novak Djokovic, Daniil Medvedev, and Carlos Alcaraz were all ranked #1 at some point this season, with Carlos finishing the year off with the #1 ranking. But we can also see a few other players claim the #1 spot in 2023. One of them is Stefanos Tsitsipas, who's ranked #4 currently. There were plenty of times this year that Stefano could have reached the top, but he had to suffer some losses. He was out in the first round of the US Open. Then he could have gone ahead of Alcaraz in the rankings when it came to the Nitto ATP Finals, but he couldn't even make it out of his group. Next year though, he can still make it to the top. He is only 1,300 points behind Alcaraz at the moment. From last year's Australian Open, he has a nice amount of points to defend at this year's event, and he does have a fighting chance if he proves himself in the first 2 Masters events. So there's a chance he'll get to the #1 spot without even winning a Grand Slam title. Last player to have done that was Marcelo Rios. Tsitsipas himself believes he can do it. While speaking at the ATP Finals, he claimed that he's fully committed to reaching the #1 spot one day. But he's not in a hurry. He added that he's here to play as much tennis as possible and hopes to make his country proud one day. Let's take a look at another player who's in the running to become world #1. Apart from the Greek player, there's the 23-year-old player Casper Ruud, who's pitched as a potential world #1 tennis player next year. At the beginning of 2022, Casper wasn't believed to be in the running at all. Many critics believe that he couldn't perform on a surface other than clay courts, but he proved them wrong by reaching the finals of the French Open and the US Open. He also reached the ATP Finals and played on the hard court at Miami Masters. But just like Stefanos, he had to make up for a lot of these finals. He only managed to win one of these 4 finals, and he has a 0-8 record against the top 3 players and 0-20 in sets. Currently, Ruud is 1,000 points behind Alcaraz, and he needs more motivation and hunger to become the world number 1. He also admitted that he's surprised by his achievements this year and that he's fully committed to achieving more next year. His coach, Tony Nadal, added that Casper had improved every year. He had full faith that his protege could reach that number 1 spot. He added that when he began training Casper, the Norwegian player couldn't believe he could even become the world number 2, and now look at where he is. Moving on to Holger Rune, committed to being the number 1 player next year. The 19-year-old player is fully determined to reach the top of the rankings someday. Maybe he'll be able to do that next year. Holger Rune ended 2022 on a remarkable note. He won 19 of all the last 21 matches he played. One of them was beating the former world number 1, Novak Djokovic, at the finals of the Paris Masters. This led him to become the first ATP player to have defeated 5 players in the top 5 outside of the ATP Finals. While speaking to the press, Rune shared his plans for 2023. He explained that his goal for 2023 was being the number 1 player. He added that he knew exactly what was stopping him from being the number 1 player, and he intended on improving. The 19-year-old claimed that his goal was not to be better than Carlos Alcaraz, but to be the best player. That's certainly ambitious, but considering that he was ranked 103 when the year began and finished at number 11, he can certainly reach that number 1 spot. But the player has to do a lot before he can achieve that. He's currently 4,000 points behind Alcaraz, so he would need to reach the final rounds of major Grand Slams and Master events, which is certainly not impossible, but is a challenging route to the number 1 spot. Wrapping up with Novak Djokovic ending the year on a lovely note. While gearing up for his return to the Australian Open, Djokovic spends quality time with his family. His wife Jelena recently posted some photos of them on a hiking trip to La Concha Mountains. Jelena and Novak were pictured standing at the top of a mountain, looking back at the camera. Marco Djokovic and Carlos Gomez Herrera also went along with him on the trip. Novak has opened up about his family playing an important role during his difficult times this year. He shared how important his family was to him and especially grateful for them supporting him during his match in Turin. He added that seeing his wife and his kids in the support stand really soothed him and helped him reorient himself. Their presence made him realize why he was playing in the first place. The Serbian player also added that he didn't know how many more matches he had left in him, so he really cherished these moments. That's a wrap for this video. Do you think Carlos Alcaraz will keep his number 1 spot next year? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one.